My friends, it doesn't matter where you're from on the globe. The United States, Nigeria, Japan, Mexico. It doesn't matter. You are under attack by an enemy that is sworn to establish a planetary tyranny. I have read the Trilateral Commission documents from the 70s where they laid out everything they were going to do, and it's now coming to fruition. We are at a crossroads. Megabanks that control the national governments of the planet and who have created thousands of trillions of dollars in false fiat derivatives have literally taken over the planet. This is a global hostile takeover. The media trains you to give up all your freedoms because you're afraid of turbaned Arabs or Muslims that are going to kill you, or 11 Russian spies. But do we ever talk about the fact that globalization itself is tyranny? That globalization itself is treason? Globalism is offshore corporations combining forces and pooling their resources to buy off and take over national governments. And once they have control of the British and U.S. and other major Western governments, they take control of our society and use our nations as engines for their global corporate empire. Oh, they wrap it in whatever nation's flag they're using. But this is a global corporate takeover, and it is treason against the nation state. It is treason against the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. This July 4th, my friends, realize that the United States is dying. It is being absorbed. It is being taken over. If you watch my film, The Obama Deception, or follow The Republic, we cover how the UN is a creation of these private banks and how it's meant to absorb national sovereignty, how the IMF and World Bank in their own documents have wrecked hundreds of third world countries, come in and given them loans that they were not meant to pay back, how Nigeria was loaned $1 billion and ended up paying over $50 billion in interest payments and still owes another $50 billion on $1 billion. That's now happening to the United States, England, Europe, and Japan. And everything we've talked about is now out in the open. We are at a historic crossroads, and the information I'm about to cover is the most important issue out there. The impending attack on Iran is a distraction for what's being set up. The oil spill, as bad as it is being used as a distraction. What is happening now is bigger than the private Federal Reserve takeover of 1913 in the United States because it's worldwide. And the things happening in the United States are happening in Greece and in Spain and in Portugal and in Germany and in England and all over the world. The robber barons who have created these trillions and trillions of dollars of derivatives as monetary weapons are engaged in a hostile corporate takeover of the free world. It is happening now. Here is CNN. 2 days after the G20 had concluded its meeting that cost $1.2 billion in Toronto, Canada, they announced in CNN, dollars should be replaced as international standard, UN report says. And they go on to say exactly what I told people a decade ago, because I was reading their own plans, that they have basically bankrupt the dollar, the pound, the euro, the yen, the yuan. All major currencies are going the way of Zimbabwe, where to buy a hamburger it cost 40 trillion Zimbabwean dollars. Literally. All we have left is our dollar. We've lost our industrialization. We've lost our factories. Remember Al Gore said NAFTA and GATT was a good deal on Larry King Live?
This has been a good deal for both Canada and the United States.
And it destroyed us. Mexico's been destroyed by NAFTA and GATT. China is a toxic cesspool because of it. India. But it's all about consolidating power. It's an economic takeover. They're going to devalue our currencies now, and that they will then create a new SDR, cashless money, between the private banking families. And there's only 6 of them. It's all admitted. Herman von Rompuy admits the G20 is the global government. We will pay our carbon taxes to the private banking consortium, and we'll still have our local currencies. They'll be devalued, and the super currency will now be this cashless system. Imagine the private banks that have already looted us now are completely transcending nation states that they've already imploded by design and sucked dry. They're literal vampires financially. And now they're creating a new global fraud, a new global cashless system that will control all the other financial systems. And in each nation, whether it's Greece or the EU or the United States, they're bringing an ironclad dictatorial power over not just other banks that are real banks that they're gobbling up, but anything that affects any facet of the economy. And so I'm going to go over all this for you right now. This is so huge. The good news is the reports that we're writing at prisonplanet.com and infowars.com are now getting international attention. And people are now starting to take notice of the fact that many years ago we broke down exactly what is now happening because we've read the Globalist Own Playbook. The Drudge Report and many other leading internet news sites did pick up our report that broke down the overall UN announcement saying ditch the dollar. And here's that headline: dollar plunges after UN call to ditch greenback. And we go over the entire spectrum of what's happening here. And so there's a fighting chance. People are really starting to pay attention to what's happening. So simultaneously, at the international level, the private big six banks, whose front companies are the IMF and World Bank, that's the International Federal Reserve, are calling for them to be able to issue the new global standard of cashless money that all our currencies are based on here in the United States. And this is happening simultaneously in every major nation, but here in the United States, legislation has passed the House and Senate. It's now in conference committee as they merge the bills to, in the words of the Washington Post, give total power to the private Federal Reserve. The private Federal Reserve, that is the holding company of the big six banks here in the United States, is saying, okay, we sold you derivatives, we took the trillions of dollars in the bailout, we won't tell Congress where the money went, now we're going to punish ourselves by giving ourselves even more power. And the Texas Banking Association 2 months ago, their president wrote an editorial and told the truth. He said, look, those big mega banks sold the derivatives. They took over our society. They're the ones consolidating power. This has been written to forcibly take over healthy banks at the state level and regional level and credit unions. And this is a huge power grab. And other mainline publications like Bloomberg have admitted that this is giving the Federal Reserve almost total control. And remember, it is a consortium of private banks. So they're being punished for wrecking our economy by design with even more power. House passes landmark financial reform bill. And when you read this article out of the Washington Post, it's very truthful. But they're spinning it as if this is all good and a solution. House Senate leaders finalized details of sweeping financial overhaul. And they say a new Consumer Protection Bureau housed in the Federal Reserve. This is the fox that killed the hens in the chicken coop. A new Consumer Protection Bureau housed in the Federal Reserve would have independent funding, an independent leader, and near total autonomy to write and enforce rules over the entire economy. The government would have broad new powers. That's the lie. This is not the government. The Federal Reserve is private. To seize and wind down large, failing financial firms, but what they actually do is grab viable firms and feed them into this big six maw, and to oversee the $600 trillion derivatives market. They're finally admitting it's in the hundreds of trillions. Most economists we talk to that are well-respected and have a good track record of analyzing this stuff say it's 1.5 quadrillion or 1,500 trillion. But here's the Washington Post saying that the Federal Reserve is giving total power over the economy to deal with the $600 trillion. Our entire economy is only $14 trillion a year. The Federal Reserve is taking our tax money and giving it to the private central banks, and they won't tell Congress who specifically is getting it. Do you realize the magnitude of this fraud? It is never before been seen, and it's only intensifying. And the media is pushing the financial reform legislation as if it punishes these criminals. So it goes on. In addition, a council of regulators, headed by the Treasury Secretary, would monitor the financial landscape for potential seismic risk, and then recommend to the private Federal Reserve what to do. And who's Tim Geithner, former Goldman Sachs executive? Who is Henry Paulson, former head of Goldman Sachs? It goes on and on. Every state is jacking up the taxes. The biggest federal income tax increase in history has now been passed and kicks in 6 months. When did we get the income tax? From 1776 to 1913, our country grew, exploded, had over 10% growth rates a year and zero inflation. 1913, the private banks take over. And they sold that as something to punish the big banks when it gave them incredible power. Now they're pitching it the same way, expanding that power like never before seen in the name of punishing them. Oh, and I'm afraid they cut benefits and raised taxes on the health care bill, and they're now telling people there is no free health care. In fact, we're going to cut the quality of your health care because the insurance companies owned by the banks wrote that. They could only do this under fake left cover by that fascist puppet, Barack Obama.